After saving enough money to settle abroad, I endured a grueling 40-hour flight and 2 days of driving with all my luggage in tow. When I finally arrived, exhausted yet excited to see Elsie Sinclair, I was shocked to find her kissing a rich playboy in a sports car outside her rented flat. In my distress, I rushed across the street and was struck by a speeding car, thrown several meters. As I was about to lose consciousness, I saw Elsie running towards me, crying hysterically, "Arthur, you can't die. I couldn't go on living without you." But this same woman, when I was discharged from hospital with a disfigured face, I overheard her on the phone in the stairwell. "How could you botch this? He wasn't killed this time. It'll be harder to try again. Peter must never know about his existence, or my child will grow up fatherless." So all my sacrifices, giving up my chance to join the police academy, working 3 jobs to put her through university abroad, were for nothing. Not only had she fallen for someone else and gotten pregnant, but she wanted me dead. Heartbroken, I packed up and returned home. To my surprise, she followed me back with tear-stained eyes, begging for forgiveness. Ding! Story Shots reminds you to click the subscribe button at the bottom right corner to read the full novel. How could you be so incompetent? You can't even handle such a simple task. Elsie Sinclair's shrill voice echoed in the cramped stairwell. Each word was like a poisoned dagger, piercing deep into my heart. "You didn't kill him this time, and now he's on guard. It'll be even harder to do it now." There were no cameras at the bottom of the apartment building or on the street. It was such a perfect opportunity. "Are you stupid or what?" She lowered her voice, her tone dripping with undisguised malice and agitation. I stood at the stairwell door, feeling as if all the blood in my body had frozen. My spine tingled, and cold sweat trickled down my back. Was this the woman I had loved for 7 years, been engaged to for 3, and spent everything I had to send her to study abroad? Was this the same Elsie Sinclair who had once been so fragile and helpless, crying in my arms and swearing she would marry no one but me? I couldn't believe my ears, nor could I believe the reality before my eyes. She actually wanted to kill me. For that rich boy with his sports car, for the child in her belly, she was actually trying to end my life. I clutched the glass in my hand so tightly that my knuckles turned white, almost crushing it. But I couldn't feel any pain, only a numbness and grief that washed over me like a tidal wave, drowning me completely. What sin had I committed to deserve such betrayal and hurt? Crack! The glass finally gave way, shattering in my hand. The sharp sound of breaking glass seemed particularly jarring in the silent space. Hearing the noise, Elsie abruptly ended her call and rushed out of the stairwell. When she saw me, the color drained from her face, and a flicker of panic flashed in her eyes. "Arthur, what are you doing here? How long have you been here?" she asked urgently, her voice trembling. Her first concern was not my bloodied hands, but whether I had overheard her conversation. I looked at her, feeling nothing but a profound sense of unfamiliarity and irony. Fighting back the pain in my heart, I forced a smile that looked worse than crying. "It's nothing, Elsie," I said. "I came out to look for you and accidentally bumped into someone. The glass just happened to break." I lowered my gaze, not daring to meet her eyes. I was afraid I might lose control and confront her, exposing her true nature. Only then did Elsie notice my bleeding palms. She let out a cry of alarm and quickly moved to support me. "How did this happen? Quick, let's get back to the ward. I'll call for a doctor." She helped me towards the hospital room, her tone anxious and her expression flustered. As the doctor bandaged my wound, Elsie stood nearby, watching nervously. Beads of sweat formed on her forehead as she kept questioning the doctor. "Doctor, will his hand be all right? He's already disfigured from the car accident. He can't lose the use of his limbs too." She choked up, her voice full of concern and distress. Her demeanor was exactly like it had been throughout the past 7 years when she had loved me deeply. Gentle, considerate, and attentive to every detail. If I hadn't overheard her conversation in the stairwell, I might have believed that Elsie Sinclair still loved me as deeply as she claimed. But now I knew it was all a lie. Her concern, her worry, her tears, it was all an act. In her heart, there was only room for that rich boy and the child she was carrying. I was merely an obstacle to her happiness, a hurdle that needed to be removed. This realization made me feel physically ill. My thoughts drifted back to the past against my will. It was the summer after my A-levels. I saw her on my way home from school, curled up in an alley corner, badly beaten and barely alive. A group of thugs surrounded her, kicking and punching her mercilessly. She had no parents and had run away from her foster home with nowhere to go. I saved her. I brought her back to my house and begged my parents to take her in. They were already struggling to raise me alone, so they refused. So I secretly used all the money they had saved for my university tuition to pay for her medical treatment. She looked at me, her eyes full of gratitude and dependence. "Thank you, Arthur. You're the only family I have now," she said weakly, her voice as soft as a feather. Not long after, my parents died in an accident at their construction job. I received a compensation payout. Instead of going to university, I used that money to continue paying for Elsie's education and medical care, giving her the best of everything. She became the most important person in my life. Until she graduated university at age 22. She kissed me of her own accord. "Arthur, I love you," she said, gazing into my eyes. "I'll never marry anyone but you." In that moment, I felt like the happiest man alive. I thought our love would be like a fairy tale, beautiful forever. But reality dealt me the cruelest blow. It had all been just my own wishful thinking. The sudden ring of a phone jolted me back to the present from the depths of my memories. Elsie's body stiffened as she shot me a quick glance. Her eyes were full of undisguised wariness and defensiveness. She hastily answered the phone, speaking fluent Portuguese to the person on the other end. "Hello? Darling, what is it?" Her voice instantly became sweet and gentle, as if she had transformed into a different person. I miss you too, so much," she cooed, stealing glances at me to gauge my reaction. "I didn't go to class today because my stomach was bothering me, so I came to the hospital," she explained casually, her tone light as if chatting with a friend. She assumed I couldn't understand Portuguese. She didn't know that in order to be by her side without embarrassing her with an uneducated fiancé, I had worked multiple jobs to save money while teaching myself Portuguese in my spare time. With only A-levels, many jobs were out of my reach. I could only wash dishes at a restaurant during the day, run a market stall in the evenings, and work construction late into the night. Despite working 3 jobs and being exhausted to the point of collapse, I never gave up on learning. I listened to her sweet voice telling lies, my heart twisting in agony. How absurd it all was. Fighting the searing pain in my chest, I stared at her expressionlessly. She finally ended the call. Turning back to me, she threw her arms around my waist, hugging me tightly. "Oh, Arthur, you scared me half to death. What would I do if anything happened to you?" she cried, her voice muffled and thick with emotion as she buried her face in my chest. She gently caressed my bandaged hand, then tenderly kissed the dressing on my face. "Arthur, don't worry. Even if your face isn't the same as before, it won't change how I feel about you." Her eyes were red-rimmed, tears threatening to spill over at any moment. "I'll study hard and find a good job after graduation. I'll earn money to pay for cosmetic surgery. We'll restore your face, I promise," she vowed earnestly, her gaze sincere and determined. Looking at her, I felt a wave of nausea. I couldn't fathom how she could speak so lovingly to me right after cooing to another man on the phone. Her acting skills were truly masterful. I even began to wonder if she had a split personality. Which was the real Elsie Sinclair? The one who loved me deeply, or the one who betrayed me? Or were they both her, and she had simply never truly loved me at all? "I've called a cab. Let's go home," she said softly, gently adjusting my collar. She supported me as we slowly made our way out of the hospital. Just as we reached the entrance, a tall, handsome foreign man approached us. It was Peter, the rich boy I had seen passionately kissing Elsie outside our apartment building. Peter's eyes lit up when he saw Elsie. He strode over and pulled her into a tight embrace. "My darling, why are you at the hospital? Are you feeling unwell?" he asked concernedly in Portuguese, his voice filled with worry. Elsie Sinclair was startled by his sudden embrace. She quickly withdrew her hand from mine, as if electrocuted. Her body stiffened, her face pale, her eyes panicked. She glanced at me furtively, seemingly worried I might discover something. I stood there, watching coldly from the sidelines. I wanted to see how she would continue her performance in this awkward situation, to see what kind of lies she could concoct to cover up her betrayal. Elsie took a deep breath, forcing herself to calm down. She quickly said to me in English, "Arthur, this is Peter, a friend I met at school. He's very friendly to us foreigners and often helps me." She stammered her explanation, her eyes flickering, unable to meet mine. Then, she turned her head, putting on a coy smile, and said to Peter in fluent Portuguese, "Darling, why did you come so suddenly? You scared me, and our baby too." Her voice was soft and sweet, with a hint of coquetry. When I heard the word baby, my mind went blank with a buzzing sound. Although I had heard her say it on the phone, hearing it come out of her mouth in person this time, I still felt as if someone had carved out my heart, carved it into pieces that could never be put back together. She turned back, continuing to introduce me to Peter in Portuguese. "This is my cousin from back home. He's here for medical treatment and to visit me." Cousin? I had actually become her cousin? Peter enthusiastically extended his hand to shake mine. "Hello, cousin. I'm Peter, Elsie's boyfriend," he said warmly in fluent Portuguese. "Elsie's cousin is my cousin too. We're all family. If you need any help, just ask. I have some connections here and can introduce you to the best doctors." He patted his chest, looking generous and righteous. Family? How ironic. She had once said we were family too. Peter's car drove straight to Elsie's apartment building without any obstacles. A 2-bedroom flat, clean and tidy, cozy as home. It was hard to imagine that another man's traces had once been here. She had moved quickly, tidying everything up while I was in the hospital. "Darling, I want to try some Chinese food," Peter murmured in Portuguese, his arm around Elsie's waist. "No problem, darling," Elsie responded in Portuguese, her voice dripping with charm. She turned to me, putting on a virtuous expression, and said in English, "I knew you were coming, so I spent a year learning how to cook. I'll make your favorite dishes. Just sit in the living room and taste my cooking." A year? She really knew how to make excuses. Someone who had never lifted a finger suddenly became a master chef? I looked at her without a word and turned to walk into the living room. The living room was full of Elsie's photos from the past few years. Travel, awards, daily life. In each one, she was smiling radiantly. In each one, I was absent. Her world, one I had never truly entered. I was nothing but an ATM for her to squander, a dispensable stranger. From the kitchen came ambiguous sounds. I could understand what they were saying. "Darling, be gentle. My cousin is still outside. It wouldn't be good if he heard us." Elsie's voice was filled with suppressed moans. Peter didn't stop. Those faint sounds were like blunt knives, torturing my heart. In broad daylight, under the bright sun. How could they be so brazen? Did they think I was dead? Disgusting. Endless disgust churned in my stomach. I stood up without hesitation and walked into the side bedroom. The clothes in my suitcase hadn't been unpacked yet. I packed them up one by one, my movements mechanical and numb. The closet door accidentally opened as I moved. Rows of clothes came into view. Lace, sheer fabric, spaghetti straps, all kinds of lingerie filled the entire closet. My hand froze in mid-air. My fist slowly clenched, nails digging deep into my palm. Did it hurt? No. My heart was already dead. What was there to fear? What did these filthy things have to do with me? I wanted to leave this place. Leave forever. Bang! The door was suddenly pushed open. Peter stood in the doorway, his face ashen. He saw the lingerie I had touched in Elsie's closet. I had just touched it in the cupboard and hadn't had a chance to put it back yet. "You bloody bastard! How dare you touch her things?" Peter roared in Portuguese, his eyes bloodshot and veins bulging on his forehead. He charged at me, landing a punch on my face. I didn't dodge. Blood instantly trickled from the corner of my mouth. I laughed, a laugh of desolation and despair. "Arthur, Peter, what's going on?" Elsie Sinclair ran over, having heard the commotion. Seeing the scene, she panicked. "Dinner's ready. Come and eat," she said, trying to change the subject, her voice trembling. Peter glared at me but said nothing more. He turned, putting his arm around Elsie, and walked towards the dining table. The table was laden with dishes, a feast for the senses. But not a single one was something I liked. The lies she told couldn't even fool herself, let alone me. "Arthur, here, try this," Elsie said, personally picking up a piece of sweet and sour spare rib and offering it to me. "And these cashews, imported from abroad, they're so fresh." She smiled brightly, like a blooming poppy. Beautiful yet deadly. I stared at the piece of spare rib. It was covered in crushed cashews. My stomach cramped. How could she forget? How could she? I'm allergic to nuts. Any kind of nuts. Once, I nearly died from accidentally eating a tiny bit of almond. I was in emergency care for 3 days and nights before my life was saved. She knew this. She had witnessed it herself and even argued with the doctor about it. But now, she was personally offering me this poison? "I won't eat it," I said coldly. My voice was devoid of any warmth. "What's wrong?" "Not to your taste." Elsie's smile faltered for a moment. "I'm allergic to nuts," I said, staring into her eyes, enunciating each word. "Oh, allergic." Elsie seemed to be taken aback. "Oh, right, I remember now, you can't eat nuts." She laughed awkwardly, putting the spare rib back on the plate. "It's fine. Eat something else, she said, picking up a piece of fish instead. But I had lost my appetite entirely. There was a strange movement under the table. I lowered my head slightly. I saw Peter's hand, brazenly caressing inside Elsie's clothes. Elsie's body trembled. She looked up, glaring at Peter. She scolded him in a low voice in Portuguese. "Stop it. If you keep going, my cousin will see. If you want to, tonight we can do it quietly, okay? I bought a lot of clothes you like to see me wear." Her voice carried a hint of suppressed coquetry and a barely noticeable excitement. It was truly disgusting. I couldn't bear it any longer and wanted to leave. "I'm full," I said, standing up. "I'm going for a walk downstairs." I didn't return to the living room but went straight to the bedroom and took out my documents. I didn't take any luggage. I walked to the bedside table and opened the drawer. I took off a ring from my finger, our engagement ring. I placed it on the table. Then, I took out a piece of paper from my bag and wrote a few words. "Elsie Sinclair, this is where we end." I put the paper under the ring and turned to leave. "Arthur, where are you going?" Elsie came after me. "You're not familiar with this place. Don't wander off," she said, her voice carrying a hint of concern. I replied coldly. "Arthur." She wanted to say more, but I didn't pay attention. Bang! I closed the door, shutting out her voice. As soon as I left, a series of frenzied cries came from inside. It was Elsie and Peter. They couldn't wait to start. Separated by just a wall, they made no effort to be discreet. Did they think I was air? No. They treated me as if I were dead. Walking down the street, the cold wind blew past me as I tightened my coat. My mind was blank. How did I end up here? For Elsie Sinclair, I gave up everything back home, including the few friends I had. I worked tirelessly day and night to earn money for her. I even sold the only flat my parents left me, all for the sake of having a home with her in this foreign land. But what did I get in return? Betrayal, humiliation, and endless mockery. I was wrong, so terribly wrong. I shouldn't have come here, shouldn't have met her. Looking at the gray, gloomy sky, tears I could no longer hold back slid down my cheeks, icy cold. At the airport, I stood in front of the ticket counter. Hello, I need a ticket. Where to? Back home. Connecting flight or direct? Direct. I didn't want to waste days on the journey just to save money anymore. I needed to leave this place immediately. Forever. All right, please wait a moment. I took out my phone. The screen showed dozens of missed calls. All from Elsie Sinclair. There was also a voice message. Arthur, where are you? I'm so worried. Her voice sounded anxious, very sincere. I laughed coldly and hung up. The phone rang again, and I hung up once more. She kept calling, kept sending voice messages. Arthur, why aren't you answering? What's wrong with you? What do you mean by leaving the ring? Say something. Until the last call before boarding. I answered. Hello, Arthur. You finally picked up. Elsie's voice was tearful. Where are you? Why did you leave? Why did you leave the engagement ring? Peter and I are innocent. Did you misunderstand? Are you breaking up with me? Are you throwing away all our years together? She fired questions rapidly. Don't look for me anymore. I spoke calmly. I'm leaving. Forgot to tell you. I understand Portuguese. Silence on the other end. A few seconds later, Elsie's terrified voice came through. What did you say? I said. I repeated word by word. I understand Portuguese. Goodbye. I hung up, turned off the phone, and threw it in the bin. Turning around, I walked towards security. This time I was really leaving, bidding farewell to the past for good. Starting anew. Back home, I was homeless. With my remaining savings, I bought a small second-hand flat in the suburbs. I had £50,000 left in savings. Without Elsie, that bottomless pit, this money would last me a long time. But I didn't want to go on like this. I wanted to find myself again, my dreams, my profession. Once I was so close to my dream, just one step away, but I gave it up for her. Now I would start over. I had enrolled in a part-time degree program years ago. Now with my degree, I prepared to take the police academy exam. I wanted to reclaim everything I had lost. The days of preparation were monotonous but fulfilling. Every day, apart from eating and sleeping, I solved practice questions, over and over again, until every bit of knowledge was etched into my brain. Physical training wasn't neglected either. Running, push-ups, pull-ups, I was like a tireless machine, squeezing every ounce of energy from myself. I also contacted top plastic surgeons in the country, inquiring about facial scar repair options. Before, I was reluctant to spend money just to give her a better life. But now, I was living for myself. The doctor said there was hope to restore 70 to 80% of my original appearance. For me, that was enough. I was already tall and well-built with regular features. It was just that car accident she caused that ruined my face and confidence. Now, I exercised actively and lived positively. My whole demeanor was renewed. Even at the gym, people would approach me, asking for my contact. I knew I was gradually improving, moving towards the direction I wanted. I changed to a new phone number, blocking everyone and everything related to the past, including Elsie Sinclair. I thought since she chose to betray me, she must be living the life she wanted. Rich, loved, with that man she thought was better than me. But I never expected. On the day I received my police academy admission letter, Elsie Sinclair actually came back. She stood at the school gate, eyes red and swollen, hair disheveled, looking haggard, as if life hadn't been kind to her. I turned to leave, but she suddenly rushed over and grabbed my arm. Arthur, don't go, she cried out, her voice hoarse. Listen to me. There was nothing between us. He threatened me. He forced me. Please forgive me? Can we start over? I looked at her, at this face that once haunted my dreams. Now I only found it laughable and pitiful. Elsie Sinclair, I said coldly, is the baby in your belly fake? Are all those sexy lingerie sets in your wardrobe fake? You two were practically having sex right in front of me. I admit, I once loved you deeply. When you went abroad, I was busy making money and rarely visited you overseas. But that's no excuse for your betrayal. Elsie froze. She unconsciously touched her belly, where a slight bump was visible, the child of her and Peter. Once a love child she was proud of. Now it had become her indelible shame. But she still refused to admit it. Arthur, you've really misunderstood me. She was still trying to deceive me. I never betrayed you. Nothing happened between us. I swear. It will never happen again. Please believe me. She shook her head desperately, tears streaming down her face like broken pearls. She was trying to gain my sympathy with her tears. But I no longer wanted any entanglement with her, not even for a second. I shook off her hand and turned to leave. At that moment, a young woman ran over from nearby. Blushing shyly, she still gathered her courage to say to me, "Hi, can I add you as a friend?" I looked at her, young, pretty, full of life, a stark contrast to Elsie. I deliberately nodded and took out my phone to accept her friend request. This action infuriated Elsie completely. She exploded like a cat whose tail had been stepped on. She couldn't believe I would move on so quickly. She thought I was still the same insecure, weak Arthur Holbrook who would meekly accept her abuse. She thought I couldn't live without her. So she hurt and betrayed me recklessly, firmly believing that no matter what she did, I would forgive her and come back to her. But she was wrong. This time I truly would not turn back. "Get away from him." Elsie shoved the young woman aside and pointed at her nose. "Look at yourself. A toad lusting after swan's flesh. He's my boyfriend. Stay away from him, or I'll make you regret it." The young woman was startled, her face pale, but she still mustered the courage to retort, You're lying. He's not your boyfriend. You've already broken up." Enough. I interrupted their argument. "Elsie, we're over. Please have some self-respect." With that, I took the young woman's hand and walked away. "Arthur, you can't do this to me," Elsie wailed behind us. "You can't like anyone else. You can only like me. You promised me. You said you'd love me forever. Come back. Come back right now." Her voice faded into the distance, lost in the wind. I didn't look back, not even once, because I knew I had finally let go of this woman who once made me love to my very core, and also hurt me to my very core. From now on, we would have nothing more to do with each other. Elsie didn't give up. She actually found my new rented flat, that small space that held the hope for my new life. She stood at the door, pressing the doorbell incessantly. The shrill, urgent sound was like a death knell. I opened the door and looked at her expressionlessly. "What are you doing here?" She threw herself at me, clutching my arm and sobbing. "Arthur, please, I'm begging you. Forgive me. I know I was wrong. It will never happen again. I promise, I swear. You're the only one in my heart, the one I love most. I can't live without you." She pleaded, repented, and professed her love over and over. But I only felt disgust. "Elsie, you love me?" I sneered. "Is this how you show your love? By sleeping with other men? By getting pregnant with someone else's child? By deceiving and betraying me again and again? Search your conscience and tell me, did you ever truly love me?" She was rendered speechless by my questions, but still refused to give up. "Arthur, I cut her off before she could make more excuses. "Elsie, do you dare to go to the hospital with me? To get a pregnancy test? To see if there's really a baby in your belly?" These words pierced through her facade like a sharp sword. She turned deathly pale, her whole body trembling, unable to utter another word. She was afraid, she was retreating. She knew that once we went to the hospital, everything would come to light. Her lies, her deception, her betrayal, all would be exposed. She would no longer have the face to confront me or pester me. Slowly, she stood up and walked away, her spirit broken. This time, she didn't come looking for me again. I thought it was all over. I could start a new life. No betrayal, no hurt, no entanglement. Until I officially became a police officer. Putting on that sacred uniform, I began to fulfill my duty. That day I was on duty. Suddenly, I received a strange call. A call from abroad. I didn't want to answer, but the phone kept ringing. I picked up. A man's voice came from the other end. Hoarse, deep with a hint of threat. Arthur Holbrook, is that right? I have something you want. What is it? Evidence about your car accident. My heart sank. The accident that Elsie Sinclair orchestrated, which nearly cost me my life. What do you want? I asked calmly, suppressing my inner shock. 300,000. He named his price. Pounds. I want cash. 300,000. For me now, it was an astronomical figure. I couldn't possibly come up with that much money. But I knew this wasn't just about money. Behind this, there must be a huge conspiracy. A truth I had to uncover. I don't want to pursue this anymore. Stop contacting me. The other end of the line was shocked. Then the man revealed a secret that stunned me. Don't you want to know how your parents died? Your parents' death wasn't an accident at all. He slowly spoke. Someone did it on purpose. If you give me 300,000, I'll tell you everything. Boom. My mind went blank instantly. My parents' death wasn't an accident? That explosion of flammable materials at the construction site was deliberate? My body began to shake violently, almost beyond control. But I'm a police officer. I must stay calm. I must uncover the truth. I must avenge my parents. I didn't want to make a fuss, but the hush money they gave me wasn't enough. So I had to come to you. He added. All right, I agreed. I'll give you the money. But you have to tell me everything, including who made you crash into me and who killed my parents. I reported this to my superiors, and the department took it very seriously, immediately setting up a special task force. They fully supported my investigation of this case. We decided to play along, first to keep that man steady, then lure him out and arrest him. I prepared the cash of £300,000 as the man requested. Of course, most of this money was prop notes. Only the top layer was real. We made thorough preparations, waiting for the man to appear. He was cunning, changing the transaction location several times. Finally, he settled on a remote, abandoned factory. He didn't know I was a police officer. He thought I was still the Arthur Holbrook who would do anything for a woman. So he let his guard down. I came to the abandoned factory alone, bringing the money. Following his instructions, I placed the money at a designated spot. Then I saw him, a short man with a gloomy face. He wore a mask and a hat, wrapping himself up tightly. He walked up to the money and started counting. At that moment, at my command, the police officers hiding around rushed in, surrounding him. He panicked, tried to escape, but it was too late. We caught him on the spot. In the interrogation room, the man confessed everything. His name was Clive Faraday, a gambler drowning in debt. He was willing to do anything for money. He said it was Elsie Sinclair who instructed him to crash into me. She promised him a large sum of money to kill me in the crash. But that day he was drunk and couldn't control the force. He only seriously injured me, didn't kill me. This made him very regretful, because Elsie Sinclair didn't give him the rest of the money. He also revealed that my parents' death was related to Elsie Sinclair. Back then, there was an explosion accident at the construction site where my parents worked, resulting in multiple deaths. My parents also perished in that accident. I always thought it was just an accident, but Clive Faraday said the explosion was deliberate. It was Elsie Sinclair who instructed him to do it. She used her young body as an exchange, making Clive Faraday tamper with the site, causing that explosion. And her purpose was to bind herself to me. Because my parents refused to adopt her, she harbored resentment. So, she would stop at nothing to get rid of my parents. This way she could live with me, grasping onto me as her only lifeline. Clive Faraday's words were like sharp blades, piercing my heart mercilessly. Cannot believe it. The woman I once loved deeply could be so vicious, so cruel. For her own selfish desires, she was willing to kill without hesitation. My heart is bleeding. My body is trembling. I hate Elsie Sinclair. I hate her heartlessness, her betrayal, her viciousness. I hate myself even more. I hate my weakness and incompetence. I hate my blindness. To have fallen in love with such a venomous woman. Even sacrificing my parents' lives and 10 years of my own. I swear, I will make Elsie Sinclair pay the price. I will make her face the punishment she deserves for her crimes. I will seek justice for my parents and for myself. Clive Faraday's confession was like a bombshell. It shattered me completely, and it also triggered a thunderous operation by the police. The application for international cooperation was quickly approved. Joint law enforcement became imperative. Elsie Sinclair, this name, was put on the red notice. We prepared detailed materials. All the evidence pointed to Elsie Sinclair, this woman who had committed heinous crimes. However, when we arrived at her former residence abroad, we came up empty-handed. Elsie Sinclair had vanished, as if she had evaporated into thin air. The neighbors said they hadn't seen her for a month. I only remember, she often came and went with a man, the neighbor recalled. I think his name was Peter? Various departments urgently coordinated. The network of connections was laid out layer by layer. I, as the direct victim of the case, was forbidden from participating in frontline operations. But I couldn't sit idly by. I bought a plane ticket at my own expense. As an ordinary person, I followed the police, cooperating in secret. I needed an answer, and more importantly, I needed justice. The relevant departments quickly locked onto Peter's identity. The result was astounding. He wasn't a rich second generation at all. All the glamour was just a facade. Even that flashy sports car was rented. He was drowning in debt. I sneered coldly. Elsie Sinclair, oh Elsie Sinclair. You schemed and plotted so meticulously. In the end, is this what you've come to? After a long week of investigation, we finally had a breakthrough. We discovered Peter's whereabouts in a hidden underground establishment. My colleagues changed into plain clothes and infiltrated the place. They observed Peter's every move. He indulged in nightly revelry, living a decadent life, surrounded by different men. On the 5th day, Peter was drunk as a skunk. The timing was perfect. The police burst in. That scene I will never forget. The room was a mess. Several men half-dressed. And Elsie Sinclair, like a broken doll, collapsed on the floor. She was skin and bones, her eyes hollow. Her body was covered in horrifying scars. She was alive but like a walking corpse, muttering repeatedly in her mouth, my child, my child." I looked at her, without a shred of pity, only endless disgust and satisfaction. Peter, like a cornered rat, was still snarling and struggling. "You damn woman! It's all your fault. You ruined me." He lunged at Elsie Sinclair, kicking her hard in the stomach. Elsie curled up into a ball, letting out a muffled groan. "Don't touch her," a young police officer roared, pinning Peter to the ground. Peter still wouldn't give up. He turned his head and spat viciously on Elsie's face, cursing fluently in Portuguese. "Pa, you slut. Stop pretending to be noble. You're nothing but a whore ridden by thousands." His words were like knives, stabbing into my heart. I looked at Elsie Sinclair, she who was once so proud, so untouchable. Now she was like a puddle of mud on the floor, trampled by others. Yet she was unexpectedly calm. No resistance, no explanation, not even a hint of anger. Her eyes were empty and numb, as if she could no longer feel pain, like a broken puppet, devoid of all vitality, until her gaze fell upon me. In that instant, her lifeless eyes suddenly burst with intense emotion. It was a complex mix of shame, fear, despair, and pleading. She abruptly covered her face, desperately trying to shrink away. "Don't look at me. Please, don't look at me," she croaked, her voice full of supplication. "Arthur, don't look at me." Her voice trembled terribly, as if squeezed from the depths of her throat. She didn't want me to see her like this. Didn't want me to see her trampled into the mud so miserably. Didn't want me to see her once proud self completely destroyed. But everything had already happened. I stood there, looking at her, feeling something viciously tearing at my heart. We once had so many beautiful memories. Now all that remained was a scene of devastation. The police dragged Peter away. He was still cursing nonstop. Elsie Sinclair, you damn woman. I'll haunt you even as a ghost. You just wait. You just wait and see. His voice gradually faded, finally disappearing at the end of the corridor. Elsie was still covering her face, her body trembling slightly. I slowly walked over and crouched down in front of her. Elsie. I called her softly, my voice hoarse beyond recognition. She finally slowly raised her head, revealing her face. That face that once haunted my dreams was now covered in bruises. There was still blood at the corner of her mouth, her eyes unfocused, without any light. Arthur. She looked at me, her lips trembling slightly, unable to speak. Her eyes were filled with pain and regret. I knew she was remorseful, regretting her initial choice, regretting everything she had done. But it was all too late now. We could never go back. She looked at me, tears finally streaming down her face. Arthur, I was wrong. I was so wrong. She sobbed, her voice breaking. I shouldn't have trusted him. I'm sorry. It's all in the past, Elsie. You must face the consequences of your actions. Some scars can never be erased. Some things can never be forgiven. The love between us had long since died. It died on that night full of lies and betrayal. The group involved in underground illegal activities was handed over to the local police. Elsie Sinclair was deported back to the country. Awaiting her would be the severe punishment of the law. The doctors said her body had been severely abused. Whipping, fractures, even the loss of her uterus. More terrifying was that her mind had completely broken down. The day of sentencing finally arrived. Death penalty, this was the fate she deserved. However, before the sentence was announced, Elsie, who had been mentally unstable, suddenly became lucid. She wept bitterly, screaming desperately to see me. I stood before her, looking at her coldly. She suddenly fell to her knees, kowtowing to me. I'm sorry, Arthur. I'm so sorry. I've wronged you, wronged your parents. I was wrong. I deserve to die. She cried out, repenting. Then she suddenly got up, rushed to the window, and leapt, ending her sinful life. I couldn't tell if I should be angry or relieved. She ended her life in this way, thinking she could atone for her sins, but she was wrong. She had been wrong from the very beginning. It was her own ignorance that completely destroyed her. After her death, the hospital called me to collect her belongings from her room. I saw the ring I had once used to propose to her, and a toy she had held onto until her death. It was a toy she had bought for her unborn child. I felt no stirring in my heart as I looked at them. There was also an apology letter she had written at some point, but I no longer wished to read it. I went to the cemetery to burn incense for my parents. It was my own fault for loving the wrong person, ruining their lives. For the rest of my life, I would atone to them. A year later, I put on my wedding suit. Standing beside me was the girl who had once asked for my contact information. She was gentle and kind. She gave me a home, a warm home full of hope. Everything from the past had faded away, and I finally welcomed a new life. My life started anew. The people I love and those who love me, they are all here, and that's enough.